Hello and welcome to Sleep is My Waking Passion, the podcast where we get real about sleep and how it shapes your life. I'm Dr. Allison Cole, a triple-boarded pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine physician who's learned to thrive despite having chronic insomnia. And now I'm here to help you do the same. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Allison Cole, and today we commence the final episode in a 3-part series dealing all with elite athletes. So here I continue my conversation with Mr. Chris Thomas, an ultra paddle enthusiast and host of the Dabbling in Paddleism podcast. Today, I'm going to answer his question about what tips I have for those who are actively in a race trying to maximize their sleep and wind down. And that may include some cool tips and tricks that may be a little kind of off the beaten path and more technologically forward. So please stay tuned and enjoy the rest of the show. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more episodes.
Are there techniques to help racers shut down their mind and fall asleep quickly that could be used as an advantage versus other competitors?
I loved that question because, you know, one of the things that you hear people talk about, and I could not find a ton of literature on it, so there's less literature on it. You know, some people may opt for a little bit of a lower dose of melatonin to help them chill out. In the real world, we really typically use melatonin at low doses to basically shift one's natural circadian rhythm. So if you're somebody who tends to, for example, have to be up early and you tend to sleep in and we're trying to realign you, we may use light, we may use some melatonin to help kind of adjust your schedule. It's really higher doses that are required in terms of pharmacotherapy to help with sleep. But the problem is they have side effects, right? And especially during a race, like you don't want to be feeling groggy, especially if you only have a short time to sleep. So I don't really love people taking a ton of things, but if you find it helpful, one of the most common things that people described in literature are really allowing themselves the shorter naps. You mentioned a 30-minute nap. And, you know, if you compare that to, let's say, a 90-minute nap or, you know, a 30-minute nap, people often find that, you know, you're not going to be getting a full night's rest on in these races, period. So just accepting that as part of it is like, okay, I've achieved that, right? So if you have a 30-minute window, what can you do to kind of rest? Well, people use caffeine to kind of get a leg up in terms of having more energy during these races. And there's actually good data that says, listen, you may finish a race a little faster if you are using caffeine judiciously. One of the things that might work would be to try a caffeine nap or a coffee nap, however you want to call it, because I know you guys have those special little packets that have some caffeine in them. You could take that. It takes 15 to 30 minutes to get absorbed. So in that time, you can shut your eyes and try to rest. What else can you do? Well, how do we kind of put yourself in that downshift and get you out of that sympathetic nervous system? One of the quickest things that you can do is you could do a 4-7-8 breath technique. That's basically, you know, you take a deep breath, you're holding it, and then you're releasing it slowly for 8 seconds. So you may take 4 seconds to take that breath. You may hold it for 7 seconds, then you're sort of releasing it for 8 seconds. So you're just kind of counting to help get yourself out of your head. When you're choosing to take those naps, like you may feel that urge. And if you have a time when you could say, listen, I'm out here, if you can be safe, that's the other thing, right? If you only have a short window to sleep, are you sleeping in your kayak or on your board? Is that typically what happens for shorter periods of time? I'm just curious, because that would make logical sense to me, but I don't know if that's accurate.
I mean, I've certainly nodded off in my kayak, but you typically are woken up very quickly when you experience that your kayak is tipping over.
Okay. Fair enough.
There are stand-up paddleboarders, however, that do these races, and I can imagine it would be much easier to fall asleep on a stand-up paddleboard without risk of tipping over. And I do know that folks that have done that, for example, in the Yukon 1000, It's much harder in a kayak because it's much more tippy. At least I haven't fallen asleep for longer than just a few seconds in a kayak. I'm not sure if there are others that are more skilled than I in doing that, but I imagine that you're not getting much more than a few seconds to, I mean, maybe maximum a few minutes. But I would think that a few minutes would be certainly on the high end of that if you're sleeping in a kayak.
Another thing that is suggested are, in addition to some breathing techniques, and it depends on if you have a place that you could use this. One of the things that I have started playing around with is something called, it's a device actually. And by the way, I'm going to state for the record, this is not an endorsement of the device. I'm not getting paid to mention the device. And I don't believe that it's been studied in this specific group of people. Okay. But I think it's kind of neat because if you're looking for a quick way to kind of relax and reset your brain, there is something from a company called Neurovalence called Modius Sleep. And it's this device that turns on for about, 30 minutes prior to when you want to go to sleep. You may feel a little kind of woozy because I've tried it, but there's these two electrodes that kind of go behind the ear. You turn on the device and it sort of alternates and sends little electric impulses to this posterior vestibular area. And they've shown that it kind of takes you out of that. It kind of increases your parasympathetic tone. And then it allows you to kind of feel like you could get to sleep. Okay. I'm going to say I've just tried it a couple of times now. It really helps because I'm going into this presentation this week and I have a little bit of that angst, like I need to practice and make sure it comes off really good, and it's public speaking and you're going to be in front of your peers and you don't want to sound like an idiot, all those things. And so I just have been a little bit more revved up. And so I've been like, how do I take things down a notch without like reaching for a glass of wine? And this kind of like really kind of chills you out. So I just wanted to point it out and I'm happy to share with you a link or what have you, because it is like an FDA approved device that's sort of new. And I think it's really kind of interesting. And I wonder if it might have some applications for a race like this. They also talk about other types of supplements out there that might sort of de-stress you. But basic stuff, again, getting away from, I need to supplement in order to feel better. I mean, they talk about things like rhodiola rosea, making sure that you're getting your carbs for those races. Carbs, sometimes a high carbohydrate. And there's other things like tart cherry juice that have been known to improve sleep, kiwi fruit that have been known to improve sleep. So if you're also focusing on nutrition during that break, and you're also thinking about nutrition that would help you both in the race by providing those carbs, but also might assist you with sleep, thinking along those lines might be helpful. And then basic stuff like if you're going to be trying to rest and it's bright outside, you're probably going to need an eye mask. There's a natural lull for many people in the middle of the day. If you're able to time it to when you're like, hey, kind of feeling this lull, I'm feeling sleepy, I'm going to have a clip of 30 minutes that I can get this rest in. You could maybe try downing some caffeine and taking your rest then, because you have that natural circadian dip. So part of this might be, and again, it's planning. It sounds like a great deal of planning for these activities. But if you can time it with how your body is feeling or when you're most likely to be able to rest, that might also give you an edge. I don't know if there are any kind of tricks or tools that you found useful when you were doing your last Yukon race where you were able to get 11 hours in that 6-day time frame. I'm just curious if you used any of those things, or what was your mindset that allowed you to get a little bit more sleep? Was it just that you got your stuff set up more quickly?
Yeah. Well, certainly I think the biggest variable was just ground game efficiency and better teamwork, number one. Number two, I definitely take caffeine tablets with me in every one of these races for sure. As you already mentioned, it's specifically related to increased athletic performance regardless of sleep deprivation. And then when you build in that sleep deprivation component, I think it certainly helps to give you a boost. I haven't tried the caffeine nap, however, like you're talking about. Typically, for example, if I'm nearing the end of that 18-hour paddle day in the Yukon, I typically, or at least in the past, haven't taken caffeine right before going to bed, specifically because I don't want it to keep me up. However, it might be a different way of thinking about it, especially in other races where, I may only be able to get 30 minutes in, for example, like in the Alabama 650. You mentioned the eye mask. That's super important in the Yukon 1000 because it's known as the land of the midnight sun. So the sun doesn't ever go down and it's always light out. So at least for me, I had to have an eye mask in order to fall asleep. And I haven't done the Alabama 650 yet, but I don't imagine that I would be able to get to sleep very fast if I'm trying to take a quick nap during the day without an eye mask. I have heard of other paddlers using tart cherry juice. I know John Nippers, who's a very well accomplished stand-up paddleboarder. He often talks about that as part of his nutrition routine. However, I don't know if he's specifically using it so that he can sleep when he wants to or can get good quality sleep when he wants to. So I'd have to ask him about that and ask him about how that has impacted his sleep and also his performance in some of these long races too. I hadn't heard about the kiwi fruit, so that's certainly interesting to me as well. But long story short, I have tried some of the things that you mentioned and others not so much.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to just allude to, because I just wonder if for some people listening, if they might use it as a signal or an opportunity to say, all right, it's time for me to get some rest now because this is happening. But when you think about those hallucinations you describe, my suspicion is very similar to what narcoleptics describe, because they have a disconnect between the control of their sleep and wake mechanism, which is that you could have sort of like intrusion of REM, because you're literally having almost micro sleeps because you're so sleep deprived that your mind starts playing tricks on you per se. But really it could be that you're perceiving that your mind is playing tricks on you in part because maybe there's some intrusiveness of sleep that you're not able to really control for. And I just wonder if you notice that, or if it's becoming really potentially detrimental, depending on the person, right? If that's a sign that if you're allowed to take breaks when you choose to take breaks, would that be a time to say, all right, this is starting to get a little out of control. This is time for me to take that 30 minutes. I emphasize 30 minutes just because that seems to be the most popular in the literature for what people do, is that they end up sleeping for about 30 minutes. The key here is if you're going to take a longer time frame and you're able to get 90 minutes even, you're typically out of stage 3 sleep by then, and you're sort of waking up at the tail end of a sleep cycle. So you tend to be less fatigued, less sort of groggy, and, more with it and more alert if you actually wake up toward the end of when you're actually having like a REM period. So 90 minutes-ish is roughly like one sleep cycle. So at the most, you're going to get one sleep cycle. And if you can get a cat nap in, okay, great. I'm just curious if you think that is realistic for the type of races that you've seen, where people can say, oh, okay, this is starting to happen a lot. Maybe I should kind of give myself 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And to be honest, I don't think that I've been in a situation yet in which I thought that I was at risk specifically because of sleep deprivation. It was more just that I was suffering from the effects of sleep deprivation. And so a couple things that I've done to really try to get out of that is, I already talked about the caffeine tabs, but that only helps to a certain extent. And I've actually got in trouble with taking too much before, because in the 23 Yukon, I wasn't feeling very well. I think it was day 6. And I thought it was because I was so sleep deprived. And so I overcompensated with caffeine. And then I felt even worse. And what I realized was I actually had just gotten behind on my nutrition. And after getting more food into me, I was a totally different paddler. And that's all in the same day. The other thing, so for example, on day 3 of that race, where I just described that on the first night I got 30 minutes, and on the second night I got about 45 minutes. On day 3 of the first year that I did it, that was one of my lowest points, and I was really struggling to stay awake. And one of the things I did to get out of that funk was simply to just go hard for 30 minutes. And so these races that last for multiple days, it's not a sprint. So most of it is zone 1 cardiac effort or zone 2 cardiac effort. And to get out of that funk, I really had to go hard, more of like a zone 3 or zone 4 for about 30, 45 minutes. And then after that, I was a totally different person. Got the epinephrine flowing, and it got the blood flowing, and it really helped with the rest of the day. But that was an example of where I had to do something different to help wake myself up. Like I mentioned previously, I haven't really had the hallucinations that many racers describe, which I believe is likely due to sleep deprivation. But I also imagine it's highly linked to electrolyte disturbances as well.
That's a very great point. I was just thinking low sodium.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that in every single race, I have specifically made an effort to keep on top of my electrolytes. And I'll never know the exact reason, at least for me specifically, why I didn't develop hallucinations, unless, of course, you count the half a day of deja vu as a hallucination. But I think it's because I do a pretty good job of keeping up with my electrolytes. But I imagine in combination, if you have sleep deprivation plus electrolyte derangements, that could likely get you into a situation that you're describing where things are going off the rails and I need to stop and sleep.
That's probably the biggest thing that I read about in terms of nutrition, not only the electrolytes, but just the type of nutrition that you're getting. One of the themes that I read about was that many times people tend to emphasize proteins and fats, and it's the wrong time during the race to really do that you really want to be hitting up the carbs and carbing quite heavily. And again, getting behind in your nutrition, you may be doing yourself a disservice, because then that has a downstream effect in terms of your quality of sleep and everything else when you're already pushing yourself to the limits. Anything else that you can think of that we didn't cover today? Because I think we did a pretty good job of getting to a lot of your questions.
I think you did. The other question that I think that I have is related to optimal sleep duration in a setting in which we know we're not going to get a lot of sleep. So let's not talk about the Yukon 1000, for example, because you have a set 6-hour time frame where you can get as much or as little sleep as you'd like or you can during that time period. So maybe shifting to something more like the Alabama 650, in which there essentially are no rules for stopping. So for example, if I do need or want to stop to sleep, is it better, over that course of 6 to 7 days to try to limit it to a 30-minute sleep? Or should I really focus on trying to get 2 hours, for example, knowing that likely, unless there are certain weather incremental conditions that make it more economical to stay off the water relative to the effort I'm putting in. So for example, if I'm putting in a ton of effort, I'm only going 1 mile an hour, that's probably a time where maybe I should pull over and get some rest and wait for the weather to subside. But for times in which I have a choice, should I choose a 30-minute nap, or should I aim more consistently for something closer to 2 hours, for example?
Well, according to what I could find in the literature, it sounds like the preference, and again, this is not an effusive number of studies, but the preference appears to be the 30-minute nap. Yeah, the caffeine nap, I think, is just one tool that you could try. And again, you have to, like if you're going to do a 30-minute nap and then say, oh, okay, in an hour, I'm going to take another 30-minute nap. Well, that doesn't make as much sense. But if you have the ability to sort of, get some rest. And, because I think there's also that mental game for you guys too, especially if you want to be really competitive. I mean, the thought of being like, I'm going to tap out for, 2 hours, I think, or 90 minutes or 2 hours. Again, if you're going to go a whole sleep cycle, you can do that. Just be mindful of when you wake up, because if you end up waking up where you're more in the deep sleep zone, that could really be you might be going backwards, because you might just like wake up being like, oh man, I'm so groggy now. And you've got to get yourself out of that sleep inertia that occurs when you're in really, really deep sleep. So, 30 minutes is enough to kind of reduce some of that sleep debt and recharge your batteries a bit. I would say play around with it. If you know that you're like, hey, I've got this next leg, if I can just get a little bit of rest now. It's been a minute since I've had some caffeine, maybe 3-4 hours since your last dose. And you're like, hey, I really feel tired. I'm going to rest. But what am I going to do in the meantime while I wait for this caffeine to kick in? That's a great time to power nap. And so that's why I'm suggesting it would be worth kind of playing around whether or not that works with your body. I think it's difficult to make stringent recommendations just because people metabolize caffeine differently. For some people, they may be very sensitive to it. I have friends that are in the sleep world that they don't even look or touch caffeine. They're like, I get palpitations. I'm like, I like my 2 cups, but I have a very strict limit. I will not go past 2 p.m. at the very latest. And I better really have had a bad night of rest the night before to really even need that 2 p.m. cup. I have to stick with the morning, and then I can get to sleep at night. And believe me, people who were like, hey, you want that espresso martini? I'm like, enjoy, but I need to sleep. And I'm definitely going to cut my sleep short if I don't do that. So I think it's sort of person to person. You did bring up the ideal sleep. What is ideal sleep? I mean, during the race, I would say you're getting what you can get. And if it's short increments and you're feeling like you're going to be as safe as you can be in an endurance race like that, okay. I think the real key is to maximize your ability to, or prioritize your sleep before you go into that race. Again, what that looks like for you may not be what it looks like for me. And again, your ability to be flexible with your sleep kind of depends on the person. I have struggled with chronic insomnia pretty much my entire adult life. And for me, I need to have a very regimented wake up time. And I just powered through in my 20s and 30s just by saying, oh, well, I'll just sleep when I'm dead. We can be dead a whole lot sooner if you never sleep. So I kind of have a shift in mindset now that I'm a little bit older, and I notice that I just can't function the same way. So that's part of the reason I even do this podcast, is because I reached a point in my ICU career where I'm like, I can't go back to shift work like I did during COVID, and I can't be paged constantly for a week in a row and then expect to function at a high level the remainder of the month, And so I think it's sort of to each their own, but I would say is if we typically kind of figure out what is sort of the bare minimum we can all survive with, if you can challenge yourself to increase that and increase it and kind of push the limits of where you can increase it and figure out where you're at, especially the week or two before that race, you might really help yourself, because there's going to be that adrenaline and everything kicking in before the race. So it would be normal for you to not really be ready to sleep the night before. There's no way I'm going to sleep great on Thursday evening knowing I'm driving to go do a talk on Friday. I just accept that. It's like the excitement and just, I don't know, it's part of being human, right? So not judging ourselves because we haven't perfected everything, I think, is the other sort of key lesson to all of this. You're really challenging the boundaries of your mindset when you do this type of race. And it means you're a very special person, and the folks that do that kind of racing that you do are also very special people. So sort of embracing that and the competitive spirit while still, staying safe and doing your day jobs and all of that. I mean, it's just such a cool experience to get to meet people who are doing things and challenging themselves in ways that I heretofore had never imagined. Literally. You've completely opened my mind, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been amazing talking to you about this stuff. And one of the variables that I would even add in there, you were just talking about the sleep banking and trying to get as much sleep right before the race. The other variable, especially for those that are traveling long distance, is jet lag too. So, either competitors that come over to the States from Europe, for example, or even if they're coming from Florida, may go up to the Yukon, which is, I think it's a 5 hour time difference there. So that can certainly be another variable that impacts sleep, especially right before the race. But I imagine you've certainly covered jet lag in other episodes. But if you have, and you know the number of the episode, I'm sure that my audience would be interested in listening to that as well.
I actually haven't talked a great deal about jet lag. That's been one of my future episode plans. But
Okay,
I will
great.
say a couple of words about that, which is if you're dedicated enough to be coming from, let's say, Europe over to the United States, and there's going to be big time swings, or like you said, coming from different parts of the United States where you still can suffer from jet lag because you're crossing the country or going to different time zone. One of the keys would be they did this with Olympic athletes where they knew that there was going to be a time zone difference. They actually made the athletes travel to like where they were. This was a U.S. Olympic athletes. I had talked about this with another guest of mine who had trained a lot of these folks, Jeff Dermer. So that episode, I can't think of the number of the episode off the top of my head, but my talk with Jeff Dermer is really good. And what he did was they actually took a bunch of Olympic athletes and they brought them to Hawaii where they trained before they were going, I believe it was to Japan for their games. And they sort of trained them at the time zone. So they were doing their workouts, they were doing their lifting, all the things they were doing in the, like pretending like they were in Japan. They just happened to be on American soil, but they were training different so that when they went that they would be ready at the time of their meet to perform. And this may be a tool that endurance athletes may want to consider if they can indeed do that. Meaning if you can come, let's say a week in advance, and you start to change when you're training and getting used to what the water and the conditions are like, that may be helping you kind of adapt to the fact that you're now in a different time zone and you need to kind of readjust your sleep and your circadian rhythm. Probably you might need more than a week, but I don't know how realistically, if you got to take time off from work, how much work time you can take off for these races.
Right.
But you may want to consider doing something like that, especially if you can work remotely, for example, and adjust your schedule so that you're sort of more optimal for race time. The other thing is there is a great app called the Time Shifter app that's great for travel and jet lag to help you sort of realign your circadian rhythm. It'll tell you things like when you should eat and when you should take melatonin and when you should get bright light. And those little helpful hints as you're planning for that race can be just an easy tool in the toolbox for you to implement. So consider those things because they could really be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll definitely look into that app as well. I do have two more questions for you. One is quick,
Sure.
and then the other one could be long depending upon how you want to respond. But the first one is kind of going back to that device that you mentioned. So is it heavy or bulky? And do you know how much it costs, just for those that are listening? The reason I asked the first question is because especially on unsupported races, when you have to start with everything that you're going to use in the race and you can't accept help from anybody else or go stop in a town and buy anything, for example, or have support from a crew, every ounce matters. And so, well, it's certainly very interesting, and I definitely want to look into that. But do you know if it's bulky or heavy at all? Or
It's
or
not
expensive?
very bulky. You can think of it's like about the size of a headband. And then you have
Okay.
little tiny patches that you take with you. So it will it add to the list of stuff you have? Yes, no doubt. But it does look like a headband with a couple of attachments. So it's
Okay.
really, I would say the equivalent of holding a pair of glasses, maybe like that equivalent, of heaviness, maybe a little bit heavier. In terms of cost, that was one of my questions for the neurovalence guy. I've heard it quoted. I'm actually because you're asking me, I'm going to see if I can find it for you, because there's Dr. Google, right? That can tell us all about what things cost. Let's see if they have a quick way. All right. It looks like you can pay it off, but it's not cheap. It's like $11.85 is what they're quoting here online.
Oh,
so
it's definitely not cheap.
Inexpensive. This is not something, it's one of those things that, I have the opportunity to try it and I'm like, wow, this thing really works great. But it's like I said, I told them, I'm like, I'm really excited to do a post on this, but I want to use it a few times to see that it can consistently help with that. So it may be something that you can experiment with, or if you happen to be super wealthy and have extra cash on you for these types of devices, also something to consider. Or if they have a reasonable payment plan or a return option, right? So they could try it. If it's not working for you, return it. So I think that's a great, simple question that I could answer for you quickly.
Well, thank you for sharing that. My other question is, so a lot of the things that we talked about, one of the themes was related to the fact that this is such a niche sport, whether you're talking about ultramarathon paddling, which is ultra niche, or ultramarathon running, which is also a pretty niche sport, but certainly much more popular and easier to enter the sport than ultramarathon paddling. Mostly the theme was there's not a whole lot of data around to, what interventions would either help to prepare for sleep deprivation in advance, or interventions, whether they're pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical, during the race that can help with sleep as well. And we kind of briefly talked a little bit about a potential research topic. I don't know if you want to go into that today, or maybe we talk about it on a future episode, but just wondering your thoughts about, what would be an interesting intervention in your mind in order to capture a little bit more data if, for example, other paddlers out there that are interested in listening, or maybe they're not even paddlers, maybe they're ultramarathon runners that could, help contribute to the overall data that's available out there.
Well, I think having, we talked about the fact that people have done studies incorporating sleep banking, but getting data specific to a particular sport with sleep banking, I think would be really interesting. Getting more data on caffeine naps in this particular sport would also be interesting. And then again, kind of getting more data on what would be the optimal time. People describe, hey, most people like this number of minutes, and it makes sense. But does it, do they notice a change in performance if they take more frequent, if they kind of schedule in the breaks, if they do some timing to their natural circadian dips? I think it would be really neat to explore if, the company that has Modius Sleep, are they interested in seeing, is this an extra tool in the toolkit that is not taking pharmacotherapy, or not, does it assist with your sleep if you can control certain variables? Can you get to sleep faster? Are people reporting positive impact? This may be a real niche invention for people that go to these extremes and need to quickly kind of de-escalate their nervous system a bit. So these are the topics that I would love to get more data on and be more specific to the sport, as opposed to, hey, we have it for people who were running a lot, for example, but would it apply here? I'd be curious, because any data that's very specific to the specific type of sport, I think has a lot more weight in terms of applying it. And a lot of the sources that I was looking at are people have written articles about it. This is how we approach our prescription for caffeine. And you do 1 to 2 mgs per kg, and you do so every 90 minutes or so. And you read different things, but I'm not seeing the literature to back it up, is my point. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see some literature to back it up.
Maybe we'll have the opportunity. So, for example, maybe there's paddlers out there that are listening to this episode and they have an interest in collaborating with us on something where we can get some more data out there. That would be great.
That would be so cool. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time today. And I look forward to some more future collaborations.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, and shout out to Sharon Sofield for connecting us. She
You,
came up with the idea
girlfriend.
for this podcast, and I thought it was an amazing idea. And she introduced us electronically, so I want to give her a shout out as well. But I really enjoyed this conversation with you, so thank you so much for collaborating with me on this episode.
Thank you.
Struggling with sleep? Dr. Cole is here to help. Whether you need a comprehensive sleep coaching program, suspect you have sleep apnea, or simply seeking a second opinion, she's available for consultation in New Jersey, New York, California, and Georgia, with more states coming soon. Schedule your free 10-minute review of services today to find out which visit is right for you at AskTheSleepMD.com and start your journey to better sleep with a trusted sleep expert.
Please be advised that the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider for personalized guidance. For my full disclaimer, please visit AskTheSleepMD.com, and while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my free newsletter. Sweet dreams and happy listening.